I think after last week, we deserve not being hit over the head again and taking it a little bit easier for at least a little bit. So here's the agenda. Today's class is definitely going to be on a lot more of a relaxing, hopefully very enjoyable tone. A lot of history. Last week we really sunk our teeth into the Talmudic method because it's very hard to talk about Talmud and history about Talmud if you don't really get a good taste of it. You know, like what even is Talmud, especially the way it relates to the Mishnah that we've been learning about. So we had to get Talmud down. We got that last week. That was a critical class. Today's class, lesson number 4, is called To Create the Talmud. How the Talmud came to be. We're going to be going through 200 plus years of history to understand the whole story, the whole evolution of the Talmud as we have it today. And it's not just history, but when you understand how it came to be, we actually understand the material so much better as well. So, all that said, we're going to be getting going into creating the Talmud. So last week, I just want to remind you, come on in, how are we doing? Hello, Louis, there we go. You could take a seat like that when your brother arrives. You could sit next to him, unless you don't want to. Okay, it's always an option. I don't want to. Okay, he's right upstairs, he told me, huh? All right, very, very good. And look at that, take some snack. Everybody has to take some snack, by the way. There's some snacks in the back. No, you have to. Come on, it's. By the way, Daniel, I told Mushki your feedback that you're waiting for some baked goods. It's very nice that it's been so healthy, but we got to do.
There's a store up the street you can buy it from.
No. So next week we're gonna do Hamantash in honor of Purim. So next week's class, you all come. You get some.
Not food though.
Yes, just straight up jelly. You know, I knew that I matured when I started liking apricot hamantashen. It was like a sign of maturity. Like, wow, I moved on from raspberry to apricot. It's like it was. Okay,
It's still good.
It's still good, but like now I'm a big boy. Okay, guys. Let me remind you from last week the general principles of what the Talmud is here to do. So this is a story. In the 2nd century of the Common Era is when we got the big move. It's about 75 years after the destruction of the Holy Temple. Life under Roman rulership in the land of Israel is not good, but comes along the great Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our holy Rebbe, goes by all these different names, and he seizes the moment. How you doing, Max? He seizes the moment and realizes that we got to put the oral Torah on record, gets together a tremendous team of Torah scholars from across the spectrum, from across different areas, north, south, even from Babylon, as we're going to learn about today. And they put together the Mishnah. But the Mishnah is put together in a way which is as tight, as terse, as brief as possible. And that is the idea. It should be a very, very short text, as short as possible, only what's necessary, and few words should somehow contain a tremendous amount of data. That was the idea. You read a sentence in the Mishnah, a lot more than what meets the eye should be contained in there. And they publish it. As soon as the Mishnah is published, this is the text. So until the Mishnah is published, you go to your yeshiva, nothing is being written down. You're just going to hear whatever the rabbi, the sage of this yeshiva has to share, wherever he's holding in the middle, but there's no text we're working off of. Now, Judaism is working off of a text. Whenever you're going to go study somewhere, you're going to have a copy of the Mishnah, or maybe you don't have your own copy, but they're going to, and all the learning happens within the context of a Mishnah. And the idea is we have a Mishnah, let's ground everything, every single detail of Jewish tradition, Jewish law, even Jewish ethics in a Mishnah, and unpack all the depth that was invested, that was compressed there into the Mishnah. So what the Talmud does is, this was the Gemara's treatment. Let me actually remind you, because this morning there's some confusion, I just want to remind you all about the terms. We have 3 terms, Talmud, Mishnah, and Gemara. Talmud is the name of the book. But in that book, there's 2 parts. There's Mishnah and there's Talmud. Mishnah is part 1 of the record of the oral tradition. That's extremely brief. And then there's Gemara. Gemara is much lengthier and it's built as a commentary and as a critical analysis of the Mishnah. Right? Sounds familiar? So Gemara is the specific part of the Talmud, which is, it's the lion's share of the Talmud, which is built as a commentary on the Mishnah, but it's sometimes interchangeable, Gemara, Talmud. The Gemara's treatment is like this. I want to remind all of you. The Gemara is always going to look at a Mishnah and look for any contradictions in the Mishnah. Is there something here that's maybe not fitting in with the larger scheme of Judaism, of other Mishnahs? It's always going to look at the nuances of the Mishnah and see what we could unpack from there. It's going to check the necessity of every single detail that is found in the Mishnah. It's going to clarify the scope of any law in the Mishnah, and it's going to explore the reasons for the laws and varying opinions in that Mishnah. And from the moment the Mishnah is officially ratified and published, manuscripts are being shared around. Once again, the study of great sages, hundreds, even thousands of sages, and their students learning Mishnah and doing this process, the Gemara treatment to all of Judaism, this is what's happening. Okay. What happens is, the yeshivas are doing this for the next long while. That is what's in the Talmud. The whole Talmud is this. But in order to understand, and the way we're going to get into the history of the Talmud, is by a fact that it's possible many of you know, maybe you don't know, that really there are two Talmuds. If you go to the bookstore and say, I would like to buy a copy of the Talmud, they're not even going to ask you which version. The Talmud is only the Babylonian Talmud. But there is something called Jerusalem Talmud. Now, most people don't study it. Why not? We'll learn about that next week. Jerusalem Talmud is basically the record of the discussion of the sages and of the yeshivos in, not Jerusalem, it's a tricky one, in Israel. They call it Jerusalem. What was that? Svat, and I think Tiberias even more, a little bit. They say that they even still have the very room where the great sages, I think it's in Tiberias, but yet northern Israel was where it was happening, not in Jerusalem. Jerusalem really lay in ruins for years and years and years and years. From the destruction of the Holy Temple, Jews never rebuilt Jerusalem. The later conquerors of Israel later came on and the Ottoman Empire rebuilt it, but Jews never touched Jerusalem once it was destroyed. Jews were in exile, even in exile in northern Israel. So there's the Jerusalem Talmud, which is what the record of all the discussions and the teachings happening in Israel. Then there's Babylonian Talmud, which is all the discussions happening in Babylon. Babylonia, no tricky ones over there. But the obvious question is, what is up with Babylonia? How do we land in Babylonia? And why is Babylon somehow more important? Their Talmud is the Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud is never the Talmud. The Talmud is only Babylonian. How did that happen? So here is the story of how that happened. And this is what's really going to get us into the history of ancient Jewish Babylonia. Now, even though today we don't really associate Babylonia as a nostalgic place for the Jewish people, right? We're maybe nostalgic, I don't know, to the golden era of Jewish life in Spain, which was really, really wonderful until the Christians came in. But under Islamic rule, we've had hundreds of years of amazing Jewish life there. Jewish life in Poland, Jewish life in France, the good old days of authentic Jewish life where Judaism prospered with, of course, the occasional anti-Semitism and pogroms and massacres, well, listen, whatever. We're Jews after all, that's what life's all about. But Babylonia really is the place that for about 1,500 years, this was Judaism. This was Jewish life in Babylonia. This is what happens. The Mishnah is published in northern Israel. There's no specific date given for it. Because it was a process. They, slowly but surely, they released one tractate at a time. It's very, very hard to say about certain things a definitive date. Even when did Maimonides write his magnum opus, his code of Jewish law? It took him many, many years. It was a long process. So you can't give a definitive date. But in the 2nd century is when Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi and his team is publishing the Mishnah. And there's the teachings and the whole process of Jewish scholarship is happening in Israel. Under Roman rule, which of course, as we discussed, is not that great, right? Roman rule, not the best place to be. Okay. Then comes along a critical year, the year 323. You familiar? Why is that a special year? Go ahead, Max.
Constantine converted to Christianity.
Emperor Constantine of Rome says Christianity is the official religion of Rome. And what do you think? Good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? Bad for the Jews. If they thought Roman life under Rome was bad, now it's really bad. Like they say, what's the difference between the Jewish pessimist and the Jewish optimist? Right? You know this one from me? The Jewish pessimist says things are so bad it can't get any worse. The Jewish optimist says, oh yes they can. So year 323 was when it was, oh yes they can. It was really, really bad. It went down south really quickly, and Jewish life in Israel under Roman rule, it became very unbearable. It was untenable. What happened was that the sages and the whole life of Jewish scholarship that was flourishing in northern Israel, by the time you reach the year 350 approximately, just 25 short years, and they're basically, we're out of here. And they migrate all the way out east, 500 plus miles, to a place called Babylonia, Babylon. Take a look in your books at page 122. So first of all, you see the small map and the big map. The small map is the area of Babylonia. I'll give you a little bit of a tour of Babylon. And in the small map, you see where it is in the context of the Middle East in general. On the left, you see there's Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. And if you go all the way out east, just walk straight, as they say in Hebrew, right? Yashar, Yashar, Yashar. Just go down straight, you'll eventually hit modern-day Iraq. It's between the two rivers, between the Great Euphrates River and the Tigris River. You will find ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Babylon, and this is home sweet home for the Jewish community for a very, very long time. There's a few different cities, we'll talk about them soon. These were the centers of Jewish life. Going from north to south, you have Pumbedisa, Naharda, Mechoza, Sura, and Masa Machasia, which were right near each other. So you have the northern communities, southern communities, and a bunch of others. Not all these communities were always around the whole time. What happens always, sometimes a community fell apart. There was anti-Semitism. Who knows what? How are we doing? Oh, you have the wrong book. There you go. There you go. Or here, so borrow mine over here. Because those are brand new, just in case somebody needs them. I don't know. There's a few people still didn't get their books. 2 people. So, all right. Okay. You're trying to figure out, why don't you have your map? Okay. But not bad. At least you have a book, just the wrong book. But okay. This is what happens. Life and the scholarship in Israel comes to a grinding halt pretty quickly, and they're all moving out east to Babylonia. Let's start with our first text for tonight. Text number 1 from the Talmud. And you want to give us a read?
Sure.
You'll begin. Text 1, page 123.
Rabbi Oshaya taught, the Holy One, blessed be he, acted charitably with the people of Israel by scattering them among the nations.
All right, that's a very positive take over here. God takes the Jewish people, spreads them all around the world, decentralizes them, and comes Rabbi Oshia and says, that was a charity for the Jewish people. Why is that a charity for the Jewish people? What do you think?
They're not being.
We're less vulnerable, meaning what?
Any particular attack could not destroy the entire nation.
There you go. Comes along Haman, or modern day Haman, says, I want to kill the Jews. The good news is he doesn't have all the Jews. By the way, the reason why, talking about Purim, we got Purim coming up very soon. The reason why Purim was one of the scariest times in Jewish history was because he was the only real anti-Semite, genocidal anti-Semite, who had actually every single Jew under his control. There was no other time. I'm saying, even Hitler, as bad as it was, at least, there were other Jews which weren't under his. Haman was very scary because this guy actually could have done it. Okay. So first of all, we're less vulnerable. What else? On that theme a little bit. What was that, David? You had a thought?
Well, it's the same concept.
Same
They
idea.
were spread around. The people that weren't in the area of the disasters, they were safer, and then they could probably eventually help the ones that were being.
Oh, there's always safe spaces. This was the idea. So number 1, not every single Jewish community is under genocidal attack, but also when the attack is over, we have where to escape to. We're not stuck. We always have an escape route. There's always a safe haven. Which you see in Jewish history. It was never, even Babylonia eventually at some point also got unsafe and it fell apart as well. But there's always a place where the Jewish community could go to, and the established safe Jewish community could support the refugee Jews. Rabbi Oshia, just to give you a little bit of historical context over here. Rabbi Oshia was a student of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, of Rabbi Judah the Prince. I don't know if he was there, if he was around at this time that we're discussing, when really the scholars had to leave Israel and go to Babylon. But he appreciated this concept. As oppression under Roman rule was getting worse and worse, he knew 500 miles out east, and by the way, these communities were very, very much in touch. It was a 3-week journey, generally speaking. 3 weeks, you could journey to Babylon, you could come back. So there was communication. They always knew the Babylonians are doing good, even though we're suffering here in Israel. We've got a safe haven. It was very, very reassuring. And he gave this, it gives you historical context to what he teaches over here. Look back at the map, page 122. The furthest the Roman Empire went was the Euphrates River. The Euphrates River was considered officially the most extreme borderline of Roman authority. And there you have a Jewish community just on the other side of the river. So this community was never under Roman authority, and this became a very critical safe space for the Jewish people. And in the year 323, going to 350, Babylonia becomes the Jewish center. So because of that, the Jerusalem Talmud was really cut short. It was never really completed. As we're going to learn, the Babylonian Talmud went on for a lot further, which is why ultimately it's the final thought, it's the final voice, it's most authoritative, most comprehensive. But let's talk a little bit about ancient Babylonia and a little bit about the story of the Jewish people in Babylon, how they got there. And what we're going to be doing through, one second, we're going to be going through multiple generations of Jewish life in Babylon. Not at all exhaustive. There's hundreds of sages, and there's so many ups and downs and sagas in the story of the Jewish people in Babylon. But we're at least going to get a very, very basic overview today. So I'm going to show you a video. But yes, first your question.
The Jerusalem Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, are they being created about the same time?
Yes, but the Babylonian Talmud extends much further. And the sages who started off contributing to the Jerusalem Talmud eventually join in Babylon. And so they're not back and forth. When they migrate, so basically Babylonian Talmud had the advantage of being the final word, and it has the benefits of even both a little bit. Okay, ready for a little video? This is a wonderful video. Give us a little bit of history of this whole Jerusalem and Babylonian business. Here we go.
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept as we recalled Zion. How can we sing God's song in a foreign land? So lamented the Jews in the 5th century BCE, as the Babylonians conquered ancient Israel, carted the majority of its population into captivity, and deposited them in Nahado along the Euphrates' eastern flank. They had hauled stones and soil from Jerusalem's Temple Mount into exile, and they used these materials to build a synagogue in Nahado. They called it Shaf V'Yatev, the slipped and settled synagogue. God's temple had fallen, but the divine presence accompanied the Jews into exile, and it would now find a station in Babylon itself. Babylon fell to Persia, and just 70 years after the temple's destruction, the edict of Persian King Cyrus allowed Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple. Still, a large Jewish population remained. A 3-week journey divides Nahado and Jerusalem. The two Jewish centers kept in regular communication, and the exiled community proved a vital safe space for Judaism when Roman persecution in the Holy Land became unbearably brutal. At the beginning of the 3rd century, a leading Nahadon sage named Shmuel rose to prominence. A brilliant Torah scholar, expert in natural sciences, including medicine, astronomy, and biology, and a Jewish judge with extensive experience in the application of civil and criminal Torah law. Under his guidance, Torah study blossomed. Another great Babylonian scholar was Abba Aricha, meaning Abba the Tall. Better known as Rav, his name appears throughout the Talmud. Rav spent time in Israel and participated in compiling the Mishnah. After returning to Babylon, he established an academy in the city of Sura, 30 miles south of Nahado, along the Euphrates, close to the ancient city of Babylon. This move was calculated. Sura's large Jewish population was not particularly observant, and Rav felt that a local study center would boost Torah observance. After Rav and Shmuel's passing in the mid-3rd century, their disciples maintained the momentum. In the north, Shmuel's area, they had major academies in Nahado, Pompadissa, and Machosa. In the south, Rav's territory, academies flourished in Sura, Masamachazia, and Narash. By the mid-4th century, Roman persecution in the Holy Land made it impossible for Torah scholarship to survive, and most of its leading sages escaped to the safety of the rivers of Babylon. At that point, Babylon became the undisputed center of Jewish life and Torah scholarship, an honor that continued for centuries to come.
It's very fascinating, Babylon was a very special and important place for the Jewish people, which is, I think, underappreciated today, right? We hear a lot less about Babylonia, but really the Talmud was their major contribution,
Are there existing sites there? Not that we could go.
Yes. No existing Jewish community left there.
But there are historical.
But sites. So many sages are buried there.
It's the 1950s when the Jews got all kicked out.
Right. But even then, the Jewish community there was not associated anymore with these ancient settlements. There are Jews that still make trips. It's a lot harder to do and arrange, and it's dangerous, but to go to the grave sites of some of the great sages, Abaye and Rava, are buried there in Iraq. We're going to talk about them today, Abaye and Rava. Okay. That's the story of Babylonia, and let's begin our story there. We learned in the video about Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel were very, very important, and they were the ones that really established Torah study, Torah centers in Babylon. You've had shuls there, but have real sages that create a culture and create these massive institutions, massive study halls. We're not talking about a few dozen people, we're not talking about a few hundred people, we're talking about thousands of people. Massive institutions of Jewish study. Rav and Shmuel were the ones who did it, and they kick off the real process of Talmudic Gemara-style discussion and learning in Babylonia. Take a look in your books on page 124. This will give us a little bit of an idea of the span of Jewish history we're going to be talking about today. We're starting in the year 200, and we're going to be going down basically until the year 500. Not all the way to 500. And we're splitting this into units of 50 years. So from 200 to 250, 250 to 300. First of all, what we do see over here is that by the time you get to the year 300, Jewish scholarship in Israel is basically coming to an end. Not all the way to the end. You still have some other people left in Israel, Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Yirmiyah, but more or less we're done. And it eventually comes to an end. Babylonia is really where the action is happening, and we're starting with the first generation, Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel are still part of, they're like they're the transition generation. Rav and Shmuel both belong to the sages of the Mishnah. They're the last generation of the Mishnah sages, which, to remind you of the term, was the Tanaim, and they're the first generation of the Amoraim, of the Talmudic sages. And they really establish Jewish scholarship in Babylonia. Okay, they were so great, and they created such a precedence of the study and the rigor of how we study Mishnah and Jewish law, that the great Rabbi Yochanan, who was a sage in Israel, he would say about Rav and Shmuel that they are my great masters, my great teachers out in the East. So these were really not just another two sages, these were the top two sages, and Rav and Shmuel, their names are found all over the Talmud. They're ubiquitous with the Talmud. Okay, just another really interesting historical detail over here about Rav and Shmuel. Let's take a look at text 2, page 125. And this is very, very interesting. A little rule of thumb over here.
Ruling rules. In every instance of disagreement between Rav and Shmuel, the halacha accords with Rav's opinion regarding ritual matters and with Shmuel's opinion regarding monetary matters.
Very, very interesting. So we have our favorites over here. If you've got a question in halacha about ritual matters, Rav is always going to be the one that you follow his opinion. But if it's about monetary matters, which means civil law, criminal law, okay, that's Shmuel, automatically. Very interesting. Why is that? So let's start with Rav. Rav, we said, was actually one of the sages who traveled to Israel to join the team of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi to put together the Mishnah. He had an advantage over Shmuel, his counterpart, that he studied directly under the great Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. He studied law in Israel, and he had a certain more authentic tradition coming all the way from the great Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi in areas of Jewish law and Jewish ritual law. So if it's a question about kosher, about holidays, Rav is always going to be the opinion that we follow. But when it comes to social law, civil law, criminal law, Shmuel gets the upper hand. Why is that? Because Shmuel was a leading authority in Babylonia. And there was a very key difference between Jewish life in Babylon to Jewish life in Israel. Jewish life in Israel, once the Romans took over, they really controlled everything. And the Jews did not have any sense of independence. So the Romans didn't have an opinion about when Shabbos should start, right? But if there was a business dispute, you had to go to a Roman court. There was no such thing as Jews having their own governance and making their own laws. No. If it's a social issue, that's Rome. If it's a criminal issue, that's Rome. Very interesting. In this point of Babylonian history, they're under the Parthians, which is like the Persians. And the Parthians say, you know what, you've got tens of thousands of Jews, hundreds of thousands of Jews living over here. You've got wonderful communities. Have your own autonomy. You could have your own independence. And literally the Jews had their own police force, their own courts, their own justice system, all based on Jewish law, which is very interesting. Real Jewish independence. And as long as you pay your taxes, as long as you pay your taxes and you guys are behaving, you could self-govern, which is very rare in Jewish history. There was a time in Poland that this happened as well. Any of you are familiar with that? Very fascinating. It was called the Committee of the Four Lands, 4 different provinces of Poland, and the Polish government said the Jews could self-govern. And the Jews had a rare time in the Jewish diaspora, Jewish exile, where Jews were literally self-governing every single detail of life. There was no secular law to go to. Jews were subjugated under, there was a police force, everything of the Jewish community. But the Rebbe said that the Jewish community didn't seize the opportunity, and God wanted to give the Jews respite in the time of exile. And instead of realizing that this is a gift from God, it ended up becoming very politicized, and the opportunity eventually was taken away from the Jews. But the Polish government let the Jews have it for a good few years, but it fell apart. By the Jews' own undoing, no? Aren't we our worst enemy sometimes? Okay. Anyways, very sad little squandered opportunity. Okay, in any case.
So both Sassanid and Parthian, they're Persian rulers.
The Parthians are Persian. The Sassanids, however you pronounce that, they are the Sassanids. They are like I don't think they were Persian. They were a very religious group. They had priests. They were like from the old pagan religions type of thing. I think they were coming from much like Asia, like more north. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what their deal was. We like the Parthians, by the way, a lot better. the Sassanids, it was tough times also. There was better or worse. The point is, if you were a sage in Israel, you had a lot of hands-on experience with ritual law. But when it comes to social law, civil law, and criminal law, rabbis weren't really practicing that. You had to go to Rome. So Rav, who spent so many years practicing and learning Judaism in Israel, he didn't have the real know-how of civil law the way Shmuel had. Shmuel was literally the top judge of the Jewish people, and he was ruling on civil law all day. So the point is, Shmuel, when it comes to civil law, Shmuel's the one you follow. So even just this rule of thumb gives us a little bit of an understanding of the history of what's happening, the dynamics in Babylonia and in Israel. Okay, Rav and Shmuel established tremendous study halls and kicks off a beautiful history in Babylonia of Jewish learning being a staple of Jewish life. If you're a Jew, you study. Let me walk you through that a little bit. Next generation, I believe it was Rav's student. Rav had a student whose name was Rav Huna. You see that in the next table on page 124? The next row, you got Rav Huna. Rav Huna builds upon the successes of Rav and Shmuel, and as we've learned, in southern Babylonia, the Jews weren't really that committed to Judaism, which is what happens when we're in exile, right? You know, Jews leave Jerusalem, leave Israel. But Rav went, and he says, we're going to build a yeshiva here, and that will lift up the whole feeling of Judaism in the whole South Babylon. Rav Huna then goes and also establishes his own yeshiva in southern Babylon, and the Talmud tells us it was such a success, and he brought the culture of Jewish learning back to the Jewish community of Babylon, that Rav Huna had thousands of students, of scholars, studying in his yeshiva on a given day. By the way, today we associate the word student with like a younger person. Oh, you're still single, you're in your teens, you go study. Those days, being a scholar was like it was a calling. And if you had the financial means to do it, or even if not, you would tell your wife, you know what, for this coming year, you didn't have savings for retirement. You had savings like that. You could take a year off and say, this year I'm going to study Torah. And you could be in your 50s, and you could be older than the sage, but you go and study Torah. It was a real thing, full-time job. You go in the morning, you sit down, and you study Torah a whole day in the yeshiva of Rav Huna. Thousands of people. There were so many people that Rav Huna couldn't speak that loud. So what they had was they had multiple layers of what was called maturgamim, which literally means translators, but I guess transmitters. People with really loud voices, and there were multiple layers of them, 13 different layers, and they would tell you what's happening in the front of the study hall. So you couldn't hear Rav Huna. I'm saying you had to show up real early to get a good spot, or else you're stuck listening to the maturgamim. But there was like multiple layers, just like that, thousands of people to be able to hear what's happening. The way the Talmud describes how great and just how awesome the scene was in Rav Huna's yeshiva is that when he was done, a real serious class, went on for a good few hours, great discussion, and then everybody would stand up and shake off their cloak. Just that dusting off of their cloak that would happen at the end of his class would like fill the atmosphere with smoke, with dust. To the point that in Israel, whenever they saw dust, like a dust cloud, or coming from the east, they're like, oh, Rav Huna just finished the class. It was like everybody knew this was how awesome Rav Huna created Jewish scholarship there. Let's read text number 3, Elisa, page 125.
I'm rising with the dust. After listening to lectures in the yeshiva of Rav Huna, the assembled sages would rise and dust off their cloaks. The dust would rise and block out the sun. They would exclaim in the west, in the land of Israel, upon seeing a large dust cloud in the distance, they have just arisen in the academy of Rav Huna of Babylonia.
Right, so I don't know if this means literally. How's it going? You had a good meeting?
Very good.
Take some snack on your way in? You missed the only joke I had for today. We'll try to fit another one in. Okay. So this is a big deal. Rav Huna's doing, but does this mean literally, by the way? I don't think you're able to see 500 plus miles out west in Israel, this cloud dust, this dust cloud, that's but it was more figurative. Like, they all knew that Rav Huna, he's the boss. He knows how to pull off a good situation, and he's got a following there. Rav Huna also does something amazing. He institutes something called Yarchei Kala. I want to put this up over here. Okay. Yarchei Kala literally means the months of learning. Rav Huna says, listen, I get it. Not every single Jew could afford being a Torah scholar and going full time. What he did is we're going to make a special accommodation. Most Jews then were working the land. That was what you did. You were a farmer. There are 2 months in the year when farming is really, really slow. Basically like March, April. We just get things started. Maybe you plant a little bit, but you don't have really a lot of work to do. You do the prep work. I don't know exactly how farming works, but the point is, you got a little bit of work to do, but you basically got open season. And then, also like around October, September maybe, which is basically you've already harvested all the crop, yeah, you're wrapping up the season, but it's downtime right now. So he says, you know what, we're going to make a special accommodation. All the farmers that usually can't come to study, these 2 months, we're going to put you up in the dormitory, we'll give you VIP treatment, but you'll come to the yeshiva for this month when it's a little bit more off, and we're going to make these massive times to come and study Torah, and you can ask questions. And this was a way that he made it even more accessible for the Jews who weren't able to be full-time students in the yeshiva to study Torah. And these were just powerful, beautiful moments of Jewish life, where Jews from all across the countryside are coming together in either Surah or Pampadissa and one of these yeshivas and coming and studying by the thousands. The Talmud even has a critique to the non-Jews living in Babylonia that there weren't enough converts. Like, how could you not be so impressed and say, I want to be part of this, when they witnessed the Yarchik Halah? So the Talmud says, like, it just showed how crude maybe those non-Jews were. Like, this would have been a reason to convert. In any case, tens of thousands of farmers are coming to work to learn Torah, to the point, you want to know how serious this was? The authorities started realizing that in these 2 months, the taxes were horrible. Horrible tax season. Why? Because for a full month, all the Jewish farmers are just taking off and they're not buying, they're not selling, no taxes. And the authorities wanted to put a stop to it. They went after Rabbah, they wanted to arrest him because they're, you can do whatever you want, but you're hurting society over here, you're hurting taxes. So this is a big deal. And the point was that this was creating, not just you have a few sages sitting around the table and having a discussion. You ever saw the painting of like a few rabbis like sitting around the table and arguing with each other? So that's not what was happening in the Talmud. The Talmud, you have the greats of the greats in public and massive sessions of studying. It was an unbelievable culture. And that's really what the Talmudic teachings, this was the context of them happening there. Okay. Then we move on to the next generation. So we have Rav and Shmuel. They establish the Talmudic schools in Babylon. Then you have the generation of Rav Huna, and we've learned a little bit about how that's growing. Then we have the next generation, from 300 to 350. 300 to 350 is the critical years, as we learned, that what happened between the years 300 and 350? Constantine. And basically what we're having is migration from the sages from Israel moving to Babylonia. Okay. So this is the era that we're going to call it of consolidation. This was a very important time. Until they have two different centers. You have the Israeli center in Tiberias, up in Tveria, and then you have 500 plus miles out east, the center of Babylon. Now all of a sudden, sages are starting to come together into one center. Now they're all in Babylon. And here we come to the next very important phase of the leadership of, if you see this there in the 300 row, third row, Abaye and Rava. You see that? Those are the last two names. Abaye and Rava. These are the two most important names in the Talmud. You are not going to find any name that is more quoted in the Talmud more than these two. Abaye and Rava. Abaye dies in 338. Rava dies in 352. Abaye and Rava changed the model of how Jewish scholarship is working. Let me share this with you. Until Abaye and Rava, every single great sage had his own style of teaching, which is very true. That doesn't mean that each sage had a different opinion necessarily, but it means the way a teacher is going to teach something is always going to be different. I know this. I have a certain teaching style. The way I'm going to teach something is different than the way another teacher is going to teach it. It's not that I'm deviating and teaching it differently, but also a very big part of studying then was working off of, and this is what we spoke about last week, the Braita, right? All the teachings that are from the era of the Mishnah, but weren't included in the Mishnah. But those weren't officially published. So different great sages had different records of different Braitot. But not every single sage and not every single yeshiva had the same record. If you go to Pampadissa, you could have one whole collection of Braitot. You go to Naharda, there's a different collection of Braitot. Sometimes they have the same Braita, but different versions of it, written differently. And most importantly, every single sage ultimately is coming and expounding and teaching Mishnahs, each in their own distinct style. And yes, there was a lot of conversation between the yeshivos, but ultimately, this was the culture. Every single teacher is teaching it in his own style, in his own voice, and in his own tradition. Abai and Rava create a new model of, you know what? Let's stop being so teaching Torah in isolation. Let's get everything down in one space. And let's bring all these different traditions together. What they did was a massive research project. How is any given Mishnah studied in every single yeshiva in existence? How does Rav Huna learn this yeshiva, this Mishnah? How does Rav Papa learn this Mishnah? What Brightot do they have in this yeshiva? What Brightot do they have there? What do they have in Israel that we don't have over here? Let's get everything on the table. When you have everything on the table, then also you see, you could start fleshing it out, critical thinking. Challenge each one. 1 second, Rav Huna taught this Mishnah in this way. Rav Papa taught the exact same Mishnah in a little bit of a different way. Who's right? So they really create what we'll call the model of Talmudic, very critical analysis, critical thinking, questioning everything, but most importantly, trying to bring everything together, consolidate everything, and study, and let's come to a final understanding of any given issue in Judaism based on the full scope of scholarship that we could find available. And it wasn't about a specific style or a specific tradition as any one sage heard it, but it was about let's get every single source that we could find on the issue and just debate it all through until we've come to a final understanding over here. And this was very, very important, that instead of it just being that different teachers have different models, one consolidated version, and then to debate every single issue with, again, every single source available and then hash it out until we get to a final word over here. Let's read it in text number 4, which describes the greatness of what Abaye and Rav are doing. Max, we're up to you over here. Text number 4, page 126.
Okay. Until the period of Abaye and Rav, students studied exclusively the branches of tradition that they received from their own teachers, precisely as it was recited to them. As a result, some students only studied the tradition according to Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshia. Other students studied it only according to the Mishnah of Bar Kapara, others according to the Bereitot of the house of Levi, or the Bereitot of the house of Shmuel, and so on. During the era of Abaye and Rava, and forever after, students were introduced to the method of studying all of the debates views. They studied all of the Bereitot and resolved and reconciled their discrepancies until they were no longer contradictory. In the course of this process, they succeeded in extracting many laws, clarifying many teachings, and uncovering their true intentions.
There you have it. This was a major, major turning point in the world of scholarship, of consolidating everything, and then what happens when you consolidate everything, you start seeing a lot more contradictions. Ooh, we thought we knew what this Mishnah means, but all of a sudden we just found out that Rav Papa was teaching this Mishnah a little bit differently. Who's right and who's wrong? And all of a sudden we find out that there's another Braita on this Mishnah that gives us another nuance of understanding over here. And what they did was they worked really, really hard. Every single issue, let's boil it down. Let's debate out every single open-ended issue in Torah in Torah law until we could find some way, which is, okay, the sages have come to a final understanding. This is what it is. What really made this possible is because we have this era of consolidation. You know, this is geopolitics over here, plays into this. We have all the sages from Israel, bringing the tradition from Israel to Babylon. And Abaye and Rava just created this new model of study, critical analysis, until we get to a bottom line. To the point that the whole model of Talmudic debate and fleshing things out, and just so nuanced, splitting hairs until we come to a final decision, that is called the debates of Abaye and Rava. Now, it's not that they were the ones debating everything, but they created the model. This was their model. And this is a very important part of bringing Judaism to a final verdict, to a final law. What is the law, instead of every single yeshiva kind of having its own tradition?
Was the consolidation recorded in the Babylonian?
Yeah, the Babylonian Talmud always has it. So for example, and we're not going to learn it because I don't want to, we already did enough heavy lifting last week, and I got to save some brain space for next week. We'll do another sugya next week, but it's going to be a little bit easier. But there's one conversation, there's one issue that comes up in Jewish law, in the Talmud. It's all about if you find a lost item, do you need to return it? Do you need to look for and there's an issue. It's an open-ended question. What they do is the Talmud goes through 15 different Boraitot. Not one, not two, 15. They found any single Braita that could shed light on this issue, and then they brought down every single one. And they have to discuss each one. What's this Braita telling us? What are the critical differences over here? That's a lot of analyzing to do. But this was the model of Abaye and Rava. We're not just going to work with the Braita that we know about. We're going to do exhaustive research, find every single little, how do you call it? Any lead. Find any lead that you could find, bring it to the table until we could flesh it out. Okay. That's Abaye and Rava. Let me put that up over here. Abaye and Rava developed the practice of subjecting every halachic teaching to rigorous analysis based on the full array of sources. That was very, very important. What Abaye and Rava really did was create the Talmudic style that we have, which is not just a bunch of fragmented teachings, but bringing it all together, allowing it to funnel down to the final word. From there, we come to the next generation. Next generation over here, if you look, going to the year between 350 and 400. What was that?
From Papa.
First of all, here we have Rav Papa, right? You're recognizing the names. Before we had a Rav Huna, now we're getting to Rav Papa. Okay, so Rav Papa is a leader in this next generation between 350 and 400. But I want to point out to you the last two names over here. Rav Ashi, who dies in the year 427, and Ravina. Rav Ashi was another one of these tremendous giants. He continues the tradition of tremendous scholarship, thousands of students. He continues the tradition of Yarchei Kala. And what he does is he creates the first test run of the Talmud as we know it. The idea was that there's 60 tractates in the Mishnah. Whenever there was a Yarchei Kala, which is basically either the spring equinox or the fall equinox. Right? What was that? Okay, that's the fancy terms. I don't know about that one. All right, so basically spring and fall, you had a month there. And when every single Jew of the whole area is in there, he said, we have 30 days. We're going to be going through the entire tractate of the Mishnah. And we're going to be doing the entire Talmudic analysis of the entire tractate. So if there's 60 tractates, and you're doing 2 tractates a year, one each month, that takes 30 years. 30 years, you just did a full run. Rav Ashi did about 2 of those. And the idea was that anybody in the hall could speak up and say, no, I think there's an issue that is not yet discussed. The point was, let's do an exhaustive job. Is there any open-ended issue about anything that needs to be spoken about in this Mishnah, or any of the issues that somehow come out of this Mishnah? And they wanted to let's do the Talmudic treatment. And after all that, doing that as like an open source project with all the Jews at these Yarchei Kala, Rav Ashi says it is time to put this down to record. There was a certain common sense of understanding that over the past 200 plus years, we've already exhausted the conversation. We've done it. Any open-ended thread, we've attacked it, we've analyzed it, and Abaye and Rava came together and consolidated it. And we've even done public oral teachings of the entire Talmud and any other issues, we've worked that through. And Rav Ashi begins a new project, which is massive. Rav Ashi deserves unbelievable credit and just the genius of him. He was the editor, not the author, but the editor, the compiler of the Talmud. What is the past 200 plus years of scholarship that's happening in Babylon? And by the way, also from Israel, because the Israeli scholars migrated to Babylon. We have their teachings now as well. And we've now butted heads and we've brought them all together with the analysis style of Abaye and Rava. Let's now get this down on a piece of paper. It takes many years. He does it with his partner, which is also here on the list right after him, Ravina. Ravina, by the way, is short. His full name was Rav Avina. But Rav Avina is a little bit of a tongue twister, so eventually turned into Ravina. All right, so you have Rav Ashi and Ravina, and they're the 2 editors who take every single record. They were basically notes, like the notes from every single yeshiva. I don't know if they had stenographers those days, But they had real good records, and they did a really good job of studying these records over all the years. He is writing it down in the Mishnah. He dies in the year 427, right? Is that what it says over here? 427, he dies. But Ravina continues the work of editing the Mishnah, and then there's a little bit more of a team under them. And the idea is, by the time we come to the year 500, we basically have the Talmud as we have it today. And the idea was, we've exhausted the conversation. Let's package this up. And the same way in the times of the Mishnah, where you had Rabbi Yehuda, the prince, and he understood Jewish life is going to be changing soon. It's important to get this down on a record. It's like that's not forgotten. This exact thing happened at this point. At this point, Jewish life was very centralized. Jewish scholarship was happening within a 20, 30 square mile radius. It was happening very, very localized. They were able to have these very, very comprehensive and authoritative conversations. This is the time to officially record it and write it down. Let's review it over here. There's 200 plus years of discussions on the Mishnah that occurred in hundreds of study houses throughout Israel and Babylonia. Come along Rav Ashi and Ravina, and they compile these discussions into one text, which we know today as the Babylonian Talmud. After Rav Ashi's passing, students edited the Babylonian Talmud and expanded on it for decades. So there was still a few decades of further editing, wrapping it up, and they also, when they wrote the Talmud, they were able to realize, are there any empty spaces over here? Are there any gaps in the teachings? They maybe realize, there's a little element of the Mishnah that we haven't yet discussed properly. So they would do the whole treatment of Abaye and Rava. Let's get every single source, let's get all the sages, let's hash it out, and finalize it. And the point was, when they did it as exhaustive as they can, they officially redacted it, published it. This is the Talmud. Now, I just want to say, this morning, I got a very good question. It's a very important question. We're learning a lot about this in the last class. Lesson 6 is a very important class. That's it. They closed the Talmud. Why can't we contribute to the Talmud? Right? It's a good question. Why do they have to lock it up from us? Wikipedia is a living document. And the answer really is because post this point, the Jewish world, and especially the Jewish world of scholarship, became fragmented. You have Rashi in France, you have the Rambam in Spain, and you have great scholars in Russia. I'm saying everybody's all over the place. Babylonia slowly fizzled out. So there were really two reasons. Number one, they felt that they've exhausted it, the conversation, which is true till today. The Talmud at the end of the day is the text. There is no further discussions to be had, which means, yes, we'll continue working with it. But any stream of Judaism and any development of Judaism is going through the Talmud, not outside the Talmud. So there's really nothing to add. The Talmud is a Talmud. We work off of the Talmud, not adding to the Talmud. But the scholarship never ended. I'm going to show you. I don't have it over here. In the Talmud, there's hundreds of commentaries. It could take a lifetime to study the commentary. Some of the commentaries started right after the publishing of the Talmud. Some of the commentaries are still happening till today. So it really never ends. It's a continuous process to continue studying. In the same way the Gemara analyzed the Mishnah, we really do the exact same treatment to the Talmud. What does the Talmud mean? How do we apply it till today? What's the scope of the law? Why would the Talmud say that? But we're going to learn the whole history of post-Talmud in lesson number 6. But the point is, at this point, with the great, great skill of Rav Ashi and Ravina, and it's an unbelievable skill. I want to demonstrate to you right now just how unbelievable the skill of editing the Talmud was. We have the Talmud, and this is the story. This is the greatness of Rav Ashi and Ravina. Let's read text number 5. Where are we holding? Yeah. Text 5, page 127.
Okay. Rav Ashi and Ravina arranged the teachings of the Amoraim that preceded them. They organized them according to the order of the tractates, placing each teaching next to the appropriate and relevant Mishnah. Along with their contemporary Amoraim, Rav Ashi and Ravina posed necessary questions and provided appropriate solutions. They established all of this in the Gemara.
There you have it. This is what Rav Ashi and Ravina did. Okay, now, to really appreciate just how amazing of a feat this was, I want to go back to what we learned last week. We spent about 40 minutes on a sugya. A sugya means like a real rigorous Talmudic conversation. Okay, it took us a good 40 minutes to explain it, and it was very, very difficult. But I just at least want to go through the cliff notes with you, just as I want to show you something over here. Okay? Let's do a little bit of the review of the sugya. If you don't remember it, or if you weren't here and you don't know it, it's okay, don't worry. Just follow along with me. We brought down the Mishnah. The Mishnah we've been working the entire time with, Mishnah from Sachem. And the Mishnah speaks about not eating a meal on the eve of Passover, but the Mishnah seems to distinguish Passover from the eve of Shabbat and other festivals. Sounds familiar? All right. And that made us an issue which the Talmud brought up, which was a big question in the study halls after the publication of the Mishnah, is which rabbi's view is this Mishnah citing? We need to understand which rabbi this fits with, for multiple reasons. There are many reasons why it's important to understand who are we citing over here for this law. Okay, comes along Rav Huna. Recognize that name? We spoke about him today. Rav Huna is the guy that when he's done his class, we got a dust storm going on over here. Rav Huna says it fits with Rabbi Yossi. Okay, the logic and all the background, that was last week. Rav Papa says it fits with Rabbi Yehuda. We introduced a second version of a Braita, which seems to reject Rav Papa's answer. Comes along Mar Zutra, and Mar Zutra challenges the second Braita and tries defending Rav Papa. Mar Zutra says the second Braita may actually not be a reliable text. Comes along Ameimar, and he verifies the authenticity of the second Braita, which makes the Talmud concludes that Rav Huna's theory and Rav Huna's understanding of the Mishnah is the correct understanding. Okay, was that okay? Sounds half familiar? Okay. Now here's the point. When you read the Talmud, and you're studying these 22 lines of text, and you've got Rav Huna, you've got Rav Papa, you've got Mar Zutra, you've got Ameimar, you got a few people. It sounds like they're all sitting around one table, right? It's like a live conversation, give and take. I think this, you think that. This guy comes and tries counter-argument against you. Somebody else defends you. Another guy says, no. Okay. When you now understand that the Talmud is 200 plus years of conversation, happening in different locations, what you actually could start realizing, which is mind-blowing, is that none of these people are talking to each other. Rav Huna is a great sage in the 3rd century, in the 200s. Rav Papa was born in the year 300. Rav Huna passed away by the year 300. Rav Papa never spoke with Rav Huna. It could be that Rav Papa didn't even know what Rav Huna said. It was just that Rav Huna, in his yeshiva, taught the Mishnah to the way he understood it. Rav Papa came to a whole different understanding of the Mishnah and taught it his way. It only came in a later generation of Abaye and Rava that they said, 1 second, let's research every single understanding of the Mishnah, and they brought it together. And that all of a sudden created this, wow, look at this. We've got an issue. 2 different sages are understanding the Mishnah differently. Who's right and who's wrong? So then it comes along Mar Zutra. Mar Zutra didn't speak to Rav Papa about his challenge. This is happening in a later phase. And Ameimar could be never even spoke to Mar Zutra. So you have different pieces of a puzzle happening in different time, by different people, by different yeshivos. Rav Ashi had a crazy job to take 200 plus years of unbelievable scholarship on a crazy amount of details of Jewish law. And not just to organize it, but to thread them together. This is a million-piece jigsaw puzzle. And Rav Ashi's brilliance, Ravina's brilliance is that they found every single little puzzle piece that belongs in this sugya, in this conversation, and they give it to you in a way that you could see the flow. And it's brilliant. When you realize this is what's happening, you realize how brilliant Abaye and Rava were. This is a very daunting way to study. But they did it. It takes an unbelievable skill. And Rav Ashi and Ravina are doing that to us. And they gave us a Talmud that we could study, and like, wow, Rav Huna says this, Rav Papa says this, Mar Zutra comes and says this, and Ameimar says this, and it's all in the proper succession. But really, this is itself a brilliance of editorialship. Is that a word? Editorialship? Something like that. of putting this together in such a way that we could study it. Pretty cool, no? All right. So Talmud really is a conversation that is happening, spanning centuries, spanning different yeshivos, and even spanning countries, times and places, hundreds of years, hundreds of miles, and just different traditions all coming together to give us the entire 360 panoramic view of how was this idea treated in the largest context and bring it down to the final understanding. With this understanding, I want to point out to you two features of the Gemara, two features of the Talmud, which are actually features which make it difficult to study the Talmud, especially this first one. But now that we understand this history, we can understand it. Before we go on, let's actually read text 7. This is an important text. Give us a read, Stuart. Text 7, page 133.
For all of its complex composition, the Talmud appears to the reader to be a seamless road. It's not until we analyze it closely that we can see the joints between the layers. Although written in Babylon, the Talmud can quote the opinion of people who lived their whole lives elsewhere. Yet it will feel as if they were standing in the same room as native Babylonians.
Pretty powerful, no? So this is people think. People think that the Talmud were a bunch of rabbis who are old and grumpy, sitting around just arguing about everything that they could. And the real truth is there was probably less arguing happening in real time than it looks like. Really just rabbis were giving their opinions. Or maybe they said, I read that there's a question that they had 100 years ago. I have a solution for it. And then 50 years later, somebody else will say, I don't know if I like that old rabbi solution. You understand? It's not a lifetime argument. It's slowly generations of scholars building upon the wisdom of previous generations and the scholarship of previous generations and just continuing it. Imagine if there's a version of philosophy that wasn't just a book of one person's philosophy, but it starts with the ancient philosophers, the Egyptian philosophers. And this philosopher says this. And then comes Socrates and he adds a different dimension to the conversation. And then comes Aristotle, gives another dimension to it. And then comes Kant and adds his, till today, and you have a running conversation. It's so much more dynamic. That's what the Talmud is. There's something very thrilling to that. It's a whole different way of approaching Judaism, and it's a whole different richness. Because of this, recording names is a critical piece of the Talmud. Who said it, and that gives us an understanding of where it was said. There's a lot of sub-data once you know who said it. If I know it's Rav Huna, 1 second. I know Rav Huna said it in this time, in this place, and I know that he wasn't speaking to Rav Papa. That just gives you a little bit different context of what's happening over here. So name recording was a big, big part of the Talmud, to the point that sometimes it gets even pretty extreme. Here's an example. And Debbie, let's just read the first paragraph of this text. Text 8 on page 134.
Rabbi Shimon Bar Zebul said that Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Papa said that Rabbi Arita of the school of Rabbi Abba said that Rabbi Zera said that Rabbi Alexar said that Rabbi Fanina said that Rabbi Meisha, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it, said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Elai.
That's not bad. That's 8 layers of attribution. Who's saying this over here? So it sounds like a joke, so get to your point already. Right? It reads like the beginning of a comedy piece. But no, it was very important. Where did this idea come from? And that gives us so much context. That's very, very critical to the way the Talmud was recorded, because it wasn't a linear conversation. It wasn't like, okay, you guys just have a conversation, I'll write down what you guys are saying. It was a critical work of bringing everything together, and attribution is meticulously maintained in the Gemara with careful attention given to identifying who said what. Okay. Because of this, I want to share with you 2 ideas of the Gemara. 2 features of the Gemara. Feature number 1 is something which gets people very, very turned off from Talmudic studying. And it makes the Talmud difficult to study. And it also makes the Talmud difficult where to find things in the Talmud. The fact is, you can't find things easily in the Talmud. Unless you are a Talmudic genius and you happen to know what is spoken about on every single given page of the Talmud, so you know exactly where to go, there's no proper index for the Talmud. And you could think you know where something should be in the Talmud based on the name of the tractate. Like if the tractate is, Rosh Hashanah, okay, Rosh Hashanah is going to be in Rosh Hashanah. But not always. Okay, this is the way it works. There's actually a story that there was, I'm forgetting now the names, maybe one of you could help me out with this. Recently, It went on the market in one of these auction houses. The entire set of the first print, the first actual print, not handwritten copy, which has happened in the 15th or 16th century in Italy, was the very first print of the Talmud. It starts with a B, the name of the printing press. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. The entire first, there is no, in existence, there is no original first printing of the Talmud from this publishing house in Italy. And all of a sudden it goes on the market for a ridiculous price. Somebody bought it. Meticulously, what was that? No. Barthenura was a commentary. No, it was a non-Jewish name.
Not Gutenberg.
No. I think before Gutenberg. No, even before. The very first printing press, very early stuff. Okay. Also, where was this copy of the Talmud kept? The story is, it was in the garage sale. Some guy just didn't even know he had it. It came from England, from the royal archives of the royal family. What happened? 500 years ago, there was a king in England. I'm forgetting the other names. I don't know. Henry II. I don't know. Something like that. And he wanted to divorce his wife. Henry VIII? Oh, it was Henry. Okay, Henry VIII. But the problem was, what did the Christians say? You're not allowed to divorce. Okay, so he's stuck in a pickle. What do I do? One of his advisors said, the Jews are brilliant. They could get you out of any problem. They have a whole tractate. It's called Kiddushin, marriage. Go and buy the Talmud. They're doing a new printing in Italy. And you'll get that. I promise if you get that book, it will tell you how to get out of it. So he did that. They put in an immediate order that whenever you got the full set ready, we're going to purchase the set. Okay. It wasn't a printing press like today. It ended up being a good few years until the full set was delivered to them. By that point, he beheaded his wife. So when they got the set of the Talmud, straight into storage. It wasn't even touched. Right? Not the story?
Divorced her, didn't behead her.
Oh, you figured out how to divorce her?
Yeah.
The first one was Catherine of Aragon.
No, but it was the second one. Right?
Yeah, but when he did it, he had her.
So I think it was about the second one that this happened. Was the first one?
He did behead her. The first one, the divorce. Where he,
But the second one he beheaded?
the second one he beheaded, the first one he just divorced.
So the first one he divorced, so the first one, by the way, there's also a whole history that Henry VIII went to rabbis. Also, he went to rabbis about a second marriage. But the way I heard the story was that by the time he got the son of the Talmud, he just beheaded her. Ran out of patience. The point, so that's where they found this. It's very interesting. So you would think, if I buy the Talmud on marriage, I'll know all the laws about marriage. And that's not the way it works. Not the way it works. The Talmud has a very interesting tendency that it starts off somewhere, but you never know where it's going to go. And it's very, very unpredictable. So you could say it's like ADD. You start on this topic, and then like somebody says one word, like, let's go to that topic. Then someone says another word, we're on another topic. Similar to like how rivers scientifically will never stay straight. A river will always start meandering. It will break away from a straight path and start curving and making twists and turns. That is how the Talmud works. It always begins with the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is always on topic. And they'll always begin with the topic of the Mishnah. But all of a sudden, that topic of the Mishnah brings us actually to a different topic, which is related, but actually on a whole different topic. And then once we got into that conversation, whoops, where do we find ourselves now? We brought up this issue, and we're at that issue. Rav Ashi, this was another part of the brilliance of Rav Ashi, he wanted not a single conversation to get lost. And he didn't organize the Talmud in a cheap way. Okay, every single detail about Shabbos goes to track the Shabbos. No. Which Mishnah is most befitting for this conversation? And not always is the Mishnah that seems to fit a given time. Sometimes, and he wanted, so any time he had the ability to include a conversation, and this was the most natural place to put it, he put it in there. So Talmud really is a brilliant weave, right? Okay. That's from Trump. He likes calling it that, right? Okay. Not an endorsement, guys. Not an endorsement. Take it easy. But he calls it the weave. So the Talmud has the weave. It's also very, very interesting. I read once, it's a fascinating idea that there's exact lines running throughout America, for example. If you take a cup of water and you pour it on the ground. So where did the water go? Oh, it went right here. Really, every single cup of water, every single drop of water is going to end up in an ocean. Where's the ocean? So there's an exact line running vertically, not perfectly, basically along the Rockies. And if you pour a cup of water east of this, it's going to end up in this ocean. You pour the water past this line, it's ending up in the Pacific Ocean. So you think you're just pouring a cup of water in Montana. No. This is going into, there's a long journey over here. So when the Talmud opens up a Mishnah, there's a long journey ahead of you, and you never know where it's going to go. But it's not staying just here. It's going to move along this meandering river, and this is part of the brilliance of Rav Ashi in the way he did it. Before I give you an example, let's read the way Rabbi Adin Evan Israel Steinsaltz describes this on page 136. Elki, let's do this, text 9.
Purposeful digressions. The focus of attention may shift from subject to subject until we find ourselves far from the eventual starting point. However, it is guided by an inner connection, sometimes very subtle, but often very strong, between all the subjects discussed. This connection is never merely superficial, and the seemingly wayward digressions, in fact, add substance and interest to the central.
So it could frustrate you, why am I learning about a different topic if I signed up to learn this tractate? But really, it's a surface level, doesn't belong here. But in theme and in the concepts we're developing, it all fits in, and it's actually vital to the central theme over here. So in our Mishnah, about the eve of Pesach, don't start a meal on the eve of Passover, which is our Mishnah that we are focusing on in this whole course. We have a Mishnah with just a few lines, and we learned the very opening sugya, right? But, dear friends, the Gemara on that Mishnah goes on for more than 15 pages. Can you imagine? How much could you talk about one little Mishnah? But it just goes on and on and on. And our Gemara really starts meandering. And I'm not going to learn the whole thing inside with you, or else we'll be here till next week. But I just want to just quickly give you an overview, and you have in your books on page 137. The meandering Sugya River. We begin with the top. We've got the main law. What's the main law? No having a meal on the eve of Passover. And the Gemara right away brings us into the larger context of 1 second. Does this apply to all holidays and all Shabbat, or only Passover? So from having a meal on the eve of the Seder or on the day of the Seder, we're actually going into the larger question of having meals on a Friday before Shabbos or before a holiday. From there, the next step is the Talmud gets into a question about, on the topic of having a meal before Shabbos, do you see, we just left Passover and now we are in the laws of Shabbos zone. So we right away deviate. The Talmud asks an interesting question. Well, what happens if you start a meal Friday afternoon, but it's like a really good meal and it's just going on and on. Next thing you know, it's Shabbos. So that's very interesting because we have two meals. We have a meal bumping into another meal. We have to make a Friday night meal, but we're already in the middle of a meal. Do I need to stop this meal? Like end this meal and then 5 minutes later start a new meal? Could I just continue this meal into Shabbos? When would I make Kiddush in this meal? Do I make Kiddush right away? Do I wait till the end of the meal? All of a sudden this whole, because that's the topic over here. We're talking about having a meal on the eve of the holiday. From there, the Talmud gets into an interesting discussion of talking about unconventional meal times and Kiddush. Kiddush is a way to kickstart a meal, but could you do Kiddush independent of a meal? And this is a very big question that really naturally flows from the previous conversations. We're like, when do you make the Kiddush? Does a Kiddush have to kick off the meal, or could it just be independent of the previous meal that you're still having from Friday afternoon? That's like 1 second. Does the Kiddush have to be married to the meal? Does it have to be in the same place as the meal? Or could you do Kiddush in shul and then come home and have a meal at home, but no Kiddush at home? So all of a sudden we got into that conversation. Then we get into another interesting conversation. We'll talk about moving locations. If you move the location of your meal, mid-meal, is it still considered one meal? Do you maybe have to say all the blessings all over again? Do you got to make a new Kiddush all over again because you moved your meal? So talking on that topic. Moving right along, what happens if it's Shabbos day and your meal runs straight into the end of Shabbos? Do you make Havdalah? Do you end Shabbos right there and then? Do you first finish the meal and then make Havdalah? Or do you do Havdalah then finish the meal after Havdalah? When do you say the grace after meals, the Birkat HaMazon? And that's actually very, very different. When you say the Birkat HaMazon, do you say the pieces for Shabbos? Is it still Shabbos or is it not Shabbos anymore? Well, the meal is kind of hybrid. It starts on Shabbos, but it ends when it's not Shabbos. So when we're saying the Birkat HaMazon for the meal, what do we say then? And then we even get into lots of other conversations that naturally flow, all about Kiddush and Havdalah. And this is going on. It takes us 15 pages until we get back to the issue of Passover. Now, the real truth is, the Talmud is not ADD. This is actually the most befitting place. This is the best Mishnah to pin these conversations to. And all these conversations really support each other, so they all belong here. But what this does is it makes finding anything in the Talmud extremely difficult. When you have any issue about Judaism, you're like, where will I find where the Talmud speaks about this? The answer is, you got no clue. Either you know or you don't know, but if you don't know, there is no guessing. The laws of Shabbos are not in Shabbos. Well, they mostly are, but a lot of Shabbos actually in the laws of Passover. And in Hanukkah, the laws of Hanukkah are in Tractate Shabbos. How did that happen? So you never know what you're going to find, which makes the Gemara learning very, very fun. But the real truth is, this isn't just lousy editing. The real way to really understand the law in any one of these given situations is only by having all this larger context. So the real truth is that this is a richness and a depth of understanding you only get by Rav Ashi telling you, no. The only way to understand this whole thing is by learning all these 15 pages. All these different discussions are really supporting each other and building off of each other. But this is really why Talmud study is definitely not going to be a book of law in the conventional sense. You'll master these ideas by the time you come out of here. That's not the way it works. And this is why later on we needed halachic codes to organize it. So we're going to learn a lot more about that in lesson number 6. So this is one feature of how Rav Ashi and Ravina organize the Talmud in a much more eclectic, meandering way. One more idea, one other feature of the Talmud that Rav Ashi put in is that Rav Ashi wanted to record a lot of things that also were not strictly legal discussions, not strictly halachic discussions. And about a quarter of the Talmud is what we call agadita. You ever heard of that word? I mentioned it in lesson number 1, agadita. If you look in your books on page 139, we have the official key term for it. There's many different ways to say it. The academics will call it agada, but if you don't want to sound like a rookie, you call it agadita. Agadita is the non-halachic teachings of the sages of the Mishnah and the Gemara. Agadita is a lot of fun. Talmudic study could be very difficult, mind-bending, make you a headache. But Agadita is always when you could, this is fun reading right now. What's in the Agadita? The Agadita is lots of just fun facts, stories, metaphors, ideas that are not legal. They're not halachic discussions. Take a look on page 142. We'll get a little bit of a taste of different kinds of Agadita. So let's go through these. There are the teachings regarding the episodes and events described in Tanakh. So, for example, every single story of the Bible. You just asked about the story of Purim, right? So, of any verse in the Bible, halachic or not halachic, also the stories, has only the bare bones over there. All the oral history and the oral tradition. What really happened during the story of Purim? Filling in all the gaps. What really happened with Abraham? All that happens in the Talmud, and that's a lot more fun to read. That's not halachic, but it's Jewish tradition. Next line, Agadita includes ethical teachings and life advice offered by individual Tanaim and Amoraim. We're going to learn in a moment an example from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had ideas, some values he wanted to share with his son. They're not halachic. It's just life values. We're going to be that's another one. Yes?
Rabbi Akiva was before Yehuda Sita, right? It was about 135.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, that's fine. It's still recorded in the Talmud. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. The Talmud includes from generations back, right? Okay. Also, we have next information and sagas regarding Jewish history. For example, the details of the Roman siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. That's there in the Talmud, not halachic, but this is wonderful literature that's very important for the Jewish people. But then we have stories about individual Tanam and Amoraim. We have stories. For example, the story we learned about in lesson number 2, an episode in which Rabbi Akiva breached the Roman ban on publicly teaching Torah and justified it with a fox and fish parable. And finally, we have theological and philosophical discussions. For example, the tradition that every Jew has a portion of the world to come. So this is called Agadata. It's 1/4. And whenever Rav Ashi could take an idea from Agadata and fit it into a halachic conversation, he'll put it in there. He found creative ways to thematically break up the flow of the Gemara and get us into an Agadata. And it always begins by its own conversation. So for example, there's a massive conversation. And just another thing, I just want to tell you that there's lots of samples of Agadata in the appendix. Some of them are harder readings, some of them are easier readings. You can take a look at it after class, definitely a lot of fun. But for example, there's a tractate called Nida. The tractate Nida walks through all the laws of family purity, of a woman going to mikveh, and all the laws that have to do with childbirth. Well, that's a natural place to have Agadata about a more mystical side of things. How does the soul evolve? All the traditions of Judaism about how pregnancy works, etc., etc. The process of the fetus, the process, the gestation of the soul as well. So that's a natural fit for it. So Rav Ashi and Ravina found all these places to do it. Let's read two pieces over here of Agadata. Should we get two pieces? Piece number 1, which is text number 10, on page 140, we're going to read it in a moment, actually is a piece of Agadata that Rav Ashi put into the Gemara on our Mishnah. Now, why is it here in this Mishnah? What did our Mishnah tell us? Okay, you have to maybe try to make the connection. Let's first read it, and then we'll maybe see why Rav Ashi put it into our Mishnah's conversation in the Talmud. So Daniel, text 10, page 140. Let's read this.
Rabbi Akiva provided his son, Rabbi Yehoshua, with 7 pieces of advice. My son, 1, do not sit in the busy part of town and study. Number 2, do not dwell in a city whose leaders are Torah scholars. Interesting. 3, do not enter your home unannounced, and certainly not your fellow's home. 4, do not deprive your feet of shoes. 5, eat early in the day during summer because of the heat and during winter because of the cold. 6, if need be, reduce your Shabbat meal to the basics, like a weekday meal, rather than accepting charity by which to enhance a Shabbat meal. 7, do business with a person who is currently experiencing good fortune. I'll take that one.
Very interesting. 7 very interesting pieces of advice, and some of them actually make your eyebrows go up, huh? Like, for example, number 2, do not dwell in a city whose leaders are Torah scholars. Oh, what's the issue with that? So, well, first of all, if these are making you think, that's the point. That's the point. These are very deep ideas. Agadata is always very deep. Halachic conversations are deep, but they're always at a certain surface level. It has to make sense. We want to know what the law is. It's not so deep necessarily. It's not mystical, it's not philosophical, it's not theological, right? It's just, we want to figure out the law, and at the end of the day, we have some logical principles we're working with. Let the best man win. Agadata is built to be a lot deeper, and it's making you think a lot more. Just think about it. What would be the problem in living in a city that the leaders are Torah scholars?
The priority is Torah study, not managing the city.
All right. That their priority has to be to study Torah, not to manage a city. Well, let's talk a little bit on another thing. Politics corrupts. Leadership corrupts. Do you want the person who's supposed to be teaching you truth to be your politician? You understand what's going on over here? These are larger themes about how Judaism sees society, larger issues, priorities. A lot of very interesting themes that one little line of Agadata could really open us up to a whole world of Jewish thought on any given issue. So it's a whole world of the Talmud of the Agadata. Let's read another quote of the Agadata, and you'll read it, you're like, what in the world is going on over here? Text 13, page 144. This is another really interesting one. David.
Strange order. Rabbi Zera encountered Rabbi Yehuda, who was standing in the entryway to his father-in-law's house. He observed that Rabbi Yehuda was in an exceptionally positive frame of mind and realized that he could pose any question at all about the world and would receive an answer. Rabbi Zera asked, why is it that goats walk ahead and ewes walked behind them. Rabbi Yehuda responded, that corresponds to the pattern of the world's creation. First darkness, then light.
Okay, so it's a very weird question to ask. As if Rabbi Yehuda was a farmer and a shepherd. Why is it that sheep always will walk behind the goats? Whenever there's a shepherd, there's goats and sheep. I'm not a shepherd, so I don't know. I never experienced this myself. But the sheep will always let the goats walk first, the sheep after. And Rabbi Yehuda says, 1 second. Goats generally are darker skinned. Sheep are always white. This is the way the world works. It follows the order from creation. First darkness and light. And you'd be like, what's going on over here? But if it's making you think, and if it sounds perplexing, that's the whole point. Agadata is this reservoir of the deepest teachings of Judaism. But in the Talmud, they didn't really find it proper to write deep ideas in a very direct way. So everything is kind of layered in metaphor. Everything is only implicit. And everything you need a lot of wisdom to kind of crack open the shell and really see what's going on over here. To really understand what's happening in Agadata, let's read text 11 and text 12. Louis, let's do text 11, page 143.
Deep wisdom. They are deep cisterns of wisdom that do not lose a drop. All their words possess an inner heart without any concealing possible.
Ooh, if you want to get to the heart of Judaism, and if you want to get this deep, deep world of wisdom, that's in the Agadata. You could read it and say, oh, yeah, a bunch of rabbis said a bunch of foolish things. But really, every single line is unbelievably deep. And let's do the next quote from the Midrash. Jim, take it away, text 12, our last text for today.
Knowing God, if you wish to recognize the one who spoke the world into being, study the Agada. For through this you will recognize the one who spoke the world into being, and you will cleave to his ways.
If you really want to get to know God and have a connection with God, it all happens in the world of Agada. So let me just show with you this text 13, where we have the final quote in text 13, where Rabbi Yehuda says it corresponds to the pattern of the world's creation, first darkness and light. This is a massive theme in Kabbalah. This is the way the Talmud is teaching us. This is the world order. There's always going to be darkness. The phase of darkness always comes before the phase of light. That happens in a personal life. It happens in the process. There's always going to be first disappointment, confusion, darkness, before comes enlightenment. What was that?
So the Jewish calendar works, night before day.
Oh, but they're saying this is a model in all of creation. Even the way the sheep walk models this. It's a big idea. The way God's energy arrives, is there's always going to be what's called tzimtzum, a contraction, a diminishment of God's light, and then you'll get the surge of energy. This is a big, big idea. So, by the way, there's a course that I'm thinking of running this summer. You'll let me know if you're interested in this. It's called Mysterious Tales of the Talmud, 6 weeks, where we go through each week another collection of Agadata from the Talmud, which you really are like, what in the world's going on over here? And we unpack it and see how the Talmud is really teaching us some of the deepest ideas in Judaism. So if you want, right now, this is all we could do. This is all the time we got for Agadata. But if you want to do Agadata in depth, you'll let me know. If we're interested, maybe after this course, we could do that course. And dear friends, and this is, yeah. And dear friends, that is also a key feature of the Talmud. The Rav Ashi wanted to include the Agadata. It brings the sages of the Gemara to life. We get to know them a lot better. And it teaches us really the soul of Judaism. That's the record of it. Right, this was the idea we got from Rabbi Yehuda. We need to go through darkness, and only then do we get to light. This is a model for life. And dear friends, with that, and look at that, 9 o'clock on the button. So well coordinated. Dear friends, that's what we got for this week, the creation of the Talmud. Next week is how the Talmud thinks, the very unique and exceptional model of Talmudic logic, Jewish logic. It's going to be a very, very fun class. And we'll get to know how the Talmud operates on a whole new level next week. Looking forward to seeing you all then. May God bless you all.